Travel Weekly webcasts in partnership with the PC agency, the travel consultancy amplifying luxury brands and boosting sales through expert PR, trade representation and dynamic marketing.
Welcome to the latest in Travel Weekly's Roadmap to Recovery webcast series. I'm Ian Taylor, a journalist with Travel Weekly, and I'm joined today by Jeremy Sampson, Chief Executive of the Travel Foundation, and Paloma Zapata, Chief Executive of Sustainable Travel International. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks.
You've just announced the formation of a new coalition, the Future for Tourism Coalition. And I wonder if you could explain what that is, what the purpose of the coalition is. Jeremy, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ian, for having us. It's great to be having this discussion with y'all. We're really excited about the launch of our coalition. As you said, it's called the Future for Tourism Coalition. Just to give you a little bit of the background, there are 6 nonprofit organizations involved in setting up this coalition. That's Travel Foundation, Sustainable Travel International, Tourism Cares, CREST, which is the Center for Responsible Travel, the Destination Stewardship Center, and Green Destinations. And many of our organizations have been working together over the years, working in very similar, with very similar stakeholders, working under the sort of the banner of sustainable tourism, in some places actually competing with one another. But several months ago, actually, before the pandemic hit, we started having some discussions bilaterally about what it would mean for us to start collaborating more meaningfully. And we thought, I certainly was one of the people advocating for this, thinking that we would be much stronger together with the opportunity to advocate for a louder voice for sustainability within tourism and for the good work that each of these organizations has been doing, and then ultimately to find ways to meaningfully cooperate. So we started the process early this year, but of course when the COVID crisis hit, it actually lit a fire under us a little bit and accelerated these efforts, because we felt that it was more important than ever that in this moment, when there is a lot of sort of dialogue about where tourism is going and how we will recover from this pandemic, that it was a really important moment to come together around some key messages and a common platform for what we felt recovery needed to look like. And then ultimately, we would be much stronger in doing this together than we would be trying to advocate for these principles on our own.
Okay, so Paloma, how will the coalition work in practice, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yes. So what we really want to become, is like by joining forces, we are defining together what, sustainable tourism really means, and what does, coming back, from this crisis as well. So what we really want to accomplish is to be able to understand what are the constraints that destinations and businesses, face when it comes to be able to adhering to these principles, for example, and to be able to collectively find solutions and be able to implement those solutions at scale. So this is what we want. This is what we aim. No, so like we, as Jeremy was saying, we were all working towards the same goal in our different sort of like organizations, with like working in a very maybe more smaller initiatives. So now by joining forces and our collective strengths can actually create solutions. So we aim to really have that dialogue with businesses and destinations to uncover what the constraints are, and so together be able to find those solutions. So we want to be the go-to group, as a collective, to find those solutions.
And why a coalition, say, rather than a merger? Why not just merge the 6 groups and be stronger together that way?
Well, we did discuss, a lot of different, options. But, a coalition, we're saying, it keeps us continuously, we can be separate organizations and, we still have, our own strategies and our own projects. And so like, it gives us, still some independence if we form this coalition, and we could do it a lot quicker.
Yeah,
So.
I would just add to that. I think that our organizations are quite complementary, and that's one reason to look at this as a coalition. We've done some work internally as organizations to sort of map out who we are and what we bring to the table when it comes to this conversation, and we find that there's actually, while there is some overlap, there's more complementarity than maybe we even realize, and certainly that externally people realize when they look at let's say the third sector within travel and tourism. So we will be working really hard to demonstrate what that complementarity looks like, and how working as a collective through a coalition can actually benefit the industry going forward. But who knows? The future is unwritten, and we may explore other avenues as time goes on. We've been quite intentional about not formalizing anything beyond this particular launch in terms of our structure, because we want to be able to listen, understand what the needs are, and ultimately be adaptive. One of the other principles I would say from the beginning is that each of our organizations is independent, objective. So we do not have in the coalition, although there are great nonprofits, for example, working with it, the foundations that are working with companies, multi-governmental organizations that are multilateral organizations that are advocating for some of the same principles that we are, like the UNWTO. We want it to be agile, independent, and able to make decisions quickly. And so that's one of the reasons that these 6 organizations have come together in order to have that particular platform of objectivity. That doesn't mean that we won't be open to working with others. That the other principle that we have is inclusivity, but we felt from the beginning it was really important that we could move quickly. And I've been really impressed, I don't know about you, Paloma, but how quickly we have been able to make decisions as a group, considering even the complexities of getting 6 different organizations in a room.
Okay.
Because we haven't met in person.
For the benefit of maybe any listeners who aren't familiar with your organizations, Paloma, could you just spend a minute telling me what Sustainable Travel International does, and where your funding comes from, and what areas you work in?
Yes. So we're a small nonprofit with big ambitions, of course. So we believe that tourism, if done correctly, can have a positive impact on the host communities and the environment. But of course, if done wrong, it could be detrimental for both. So we aim to partner with businesses, with destinations, and with communities in their journey towards a more sustainable tourism environment. So, we focus on more inclusivity, waste management, climate change adaptation, working with these, different stakeholders. So as far as like lines of business, we do work with destinations. So, we can work with ministries of tourism, with other NGOs, with multilateral organizations, and we also work with the private sector. So through their journey, again, by implementing solutions that will lead them to more sustainable supply chain, for example, as well as, also we do have a component of carbon offsetting. That any business and destination should strive to reduce their carbon footprint, but there comes a moment where you cannot, and therefore a carbon offsetting is a scheme not only to reduce the carbon emissions in the that you produce, but also to support communities, because those it's a funding mechanism for example forest communities that to enhance their livelihoods, so they're less extractive, for example. So that's one of our lines of business as well.
Okay. And do you work with destinations in a particular region, say the Americas, Caribbean, and so on, or do you have a
We work a
global?
lot, we work a lot with the Americas. So we are mainly focusing right now on small island developing nations that rely heavily on tourism. So low-lying islands that are very vulnerable. They have a fragile ecosystems, and they're very much reliant on the tourism industry, as well as coastal destinations and protected areas. So for example, right now we're working with the Seychelles, with St. Kitts in the Caribbean, and with the island of Palau. So very broad. There are island nations all over the world.
Okay. And Jeremy, do you want to just update people who may not be familiar with the Travel Foundation? Probably in the
Sure.
UK, most people are, but
Sure.
on the Travel Foundation's work?
Sure, yeah. We are a sustainable tourism charity, which was founded in 2003. We were originally set up as a cooperation of several UK outbound operators, TUI, Thomas Cook, Virgin Holidays, working actually in cooperation with the UK government to create a mechanism for funding projects that to protect livelihoods and resources within destinations where UK holidaymakers traveled. We've evolved a bit over the years, as has the conversation around tourism in many ways. You know, we've matured as an organization and become more of a global organization, although we're based in Bristol. We do work and are funded globally now, and more of a mix. We are funded by a mixture of destinations directly, companies, private foundations, and donor development agencies. And let's see, we work on two strategic objectives. So the first one is around helping destinations to better understand the impacts of tourism and manage those impacts. And then two, to ensure that local people are maximizing the benefits of tourism, and that livelihoods in particular are emphasized for local communities. And we do this primarily through developing the capacity of destinations and companies to achieve those two strategic objectives. So we have a lot of training programs, a lot of methodologies, research that we develop, and we do innovate through implementing projects on the ground.
Okay. And of the other coalition partners, I know Tourism Cares came out of the industry, as did the Travel Foundation. What about the Centre for Responsible Travel, Destination Stewardship Centre, and Green Destinations? Can you just fill listeners in, and maybe if you take a couple of them each, fill people in on the areas they cover, and perhaps to show how the coalition members are complementary?
Sure. Which one do you want to take, Paloma?
You're on mute, Paloma.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I know a little bit more about Green Destinations, to be honest. If you know more about the Stewardship Center, you can go ahead. But I mean,
go ahead on Green Destinations.
Yeah, I mean, so Green Destinations, they really focus on well, basically, working with destinations and identifying destinations that are on the right path and recognizing them. And also they have a sustainability management system to support in their efforts to be able to track their sustainability efforts and to be able to report on them. So they focus really a lot on, as their name says, on identifying those destinations, providing them the tools and through their journey and recognizing them. And Jeremy, let me know if you think that if I'm true to that, or there's more.
Yeah. That sounds right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think they've shifted in a way, a really big focus on capacity building for nations, and they also host annually the annual Sustainable Destination Top 100.
Right, which is about recognizing them.
Yep.
It's about recognizing destinations and learning.
Yeah. So CREST, which is the Center for Responsible Travel, I mean, I'd say there are a lot of similarities with our organization, but they have primarily been a research organization. So a lot of their work, in addition to some similarities to what we do, they have published quite a lot of research over the years on key topics related to sustainable tourism.
Sure. Okay.
And the Destination Stewardship Center was specifically focused to help destinations identify better ways to cooperate among public and private sector, as well as intra-agency. As one of the sort of founding principles of destination management, that there's actually a need for better cooperation in order to achieve sustainable destinations. And so they raise a lot of awareness about the destinations that are doing that well, and help provide support to destinations that are interested in learning how to be better stewards and adopt these good practices around destination management. We should also say that we have a formal advisor, which is the GSTC, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, who has been with us from the beginning, not as a formal coalition member, but rather as an advisor. And the GSTC destination criteria are something that we have all agreed should be fundamental to the work that we do, because they provide a framework for how the industry criteria as well, for how us as a coalition and the work that we do should be viewed and ultimately implemented. That doesn't mean that we only use those criteria, but they provide, as they do for all of the stakeholders that we work with, a really nice framework for understanding how best to think about sustainability, within a company or within a destination community.
Okay, and we should say that Tourism Cares is also a member of the coalition. That came out of the Travel Corporation, I think, and some other WTTC members. Am I right?
Yeah, very much. They're a member-based organization, and their members are bigger companies. They've done a lot of work over the years trying to influence the behaviors and practices of those companies, including as well as looking at their corporate social responsibility and philanthropy, and trying to link up how those programs can best be sort of maximized to support destination communities. That's an interesting conversation, because I think over the years that effort has not always been well aligned, but we're seeing more interest from companies in really understanding how well they can be stewards of destinations, what their role is, how can they make sort of investments in those destinations, understand impacts in those destinations, and align their philanthropic programs and corporate social responsibility with the impact and the need that the destinations have in terms of their relationship.
Okay, well, look, obviously this is an unprecedented moment for the world, for travel, and for you with the coalition. Why now? Why is the recovery from COVID the moment you see to establish this coalition and pursue these objectives? Paloma.
Well, to be honest with you, we were going to do this before. We had been talking about this for a while. We had already had bilateral meetings, and we had been discussing it. And we had our first meeting right when lockdown was about to happen.
Early March.
It's like, and we were like, is it happening? What's going on? So, and then we said, okay, well then this is the moment, really. I mean, now more than ever, then is the time to band together and to really be that guiding, that guiding path for the sector as they consider, recovering. So we took the moment, but we were going to do this anyways. But we felt that, okay, now we really need to get our act together and do it now, as the sector is thinking about recovery.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and how do you propose to guide the sector?
Well, as we were saying, so our next objective right now is to really listen, is to be, we put in the principles. This is what we believe that everybody should take into consideration now as they're coming back. Now is the time to have a dialogue. Now is the time to listen as to, okay, what are you guys, what is the destinations and the businesses, what is everyone doing to adhere to this, and where are your constraints? So what we aim to do is listen, is to create this dialogue, and to be able to collectively provide a path for solutions.
Okay, Jeremy, in practice, what does that mean? Are you going to call up chief executives or, you know, prime ministers and say we need to speak to you, or how's it going to work?
Yeah, we have very intentionally not designed our specific activities yet. I mean, off what Paloma said, the idea here is to listen. I think there's an important reason for this. You know, we as NGOs, most of us have been around for about 20 years, and we have been having this discussion pretty much for the entirety of our existence. And what we do not want to be is just a bunch of sideline organizations kind of shouting in the wind about things that need to happen while the industry goes down whatever path that it wants. And why we've set up this process of listening and trying to really understand and dig into the barriers so that we can start to actually have a bigger impact. I mean, I don't want to discount what's happened before, because I think that progress has been made. You know, a couple of months ago, I felt like we were actually having a real moment. There was some real progress that had been made in helping people to understand that perhaps the path that the industry was on was not one that could continue in the way that it was. And it was being supported by everything that was happening in the media. Alarm bells raising about over-tourism, crowds, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And equally, you know, we're even starting to see little shifts in demand, and customers actually coming back. I mean, we had some quite large and quite sort of I don't know, more sort of generic mass tourism companies approach us in January and February and say, our customers are asking us what we're doing. So I think we were already on this trajectory, being able to respond. But what's needed, and I think what's needed from our organizations, is the how. We need to provide solutions. We need to provide good practices. We need to provide answers. And the only way that we can do that and to really be a going concern for the industry, I believe, is to raise our voices together and say, you know, there is a need to support the development of these solutions and the dissemination of the research and good practice. And this is something that I think the industry has unfortunately not supported well over the years. And this is another one of the reasons for us to come together. You look at other industries and you see really well supported third sectors that provide tools, solutions, research, advocacy, etc. And I think it's high time that we have this. I think the sector needs it, and we'll really need to be so this may be a little bit self-serving. It is, but we this is what we intend to do, and we don't want to be quiet and sidelined anymore. We want to have a strong voice. So one of the ways I see that we can do this, and that's why we started with really an awareness building campaign around the founding principles, is just to raise our voice and to do that in a way that's going to get more attention for the direction that we're going. The question that you're asking, Ian, I think is really important. Is what does that really mean in practice, and how do we actually get people to change their behaviors? I mean, I think that it needs to start with a mindset for change, and it also needs to start with an awareness about the challenges that tourism faces. You know, last year we put out our report, The Invisible Burden of Tourism, which highlighted the gap that most destinations have in terms of information about the negative impacts of tourism and the costs of servicing tourism demand. This is a perfect example of something that has raised quite a lot of awareness about the need to collect better information and to address and understand these costs in order to better analyze the implications of future growth. But what's needed now is to provide destinations and the companies that work there with the solutions, the way to account for this information and the tools that are needed to actually develop a mandate to respond and do something differently. And that's where we need to go from here.
Okay, let's go to some of the points you've raised there in a moment, but just establishing the coalition now and issuing this challenge to the sector now, is the timing good for that? Because the challenge the industry faces in recovery is enormous, isn't it? Given the likely extent and duration of the downturn in travel, the impact on livelihoods, the impact on revenues, the debt accumulation, and so on. Realistically, is the industry going to be open to arguments that, well, you need to spend more because you need to be mitigating climate change, you need to have a fairer income distribution, you need to do all these things on top of getting businesses back up and running and getting numbers of people into resorts? Do you think you're going to get a hearing? Paloma?
Well, I mean, some of these things just actually make business sense. We're not necessarily saying that this, you need to invest more in something that's not going to give you returns. It's quite the opposite. If you do things correctly, you can have better, experiences, better destinations. And now more than ever, what is the sector is going to look like? What are people looking for? They're looking for experiences. I mean, the sector has been, calling for that. The market has been calling for that for a while. So now is the time to really reevaluate how you are doing things. So I don't necessarily think that this means that it's going to be, less cost effective. I think it's quite the contrary. And now is the time, as you're thinking about coming back, is how to actually build a more sustainable, business and destination that is able to withstand the shocks. Because more of these shocks can come. I mean, more and more when it comes to climate change, when it comes to, future pandemics. I mean, these are real threats to the industry. And so it's a matter of being able to have a holistic view of what all of this means and how, you're able to do business in this environment and do it safely and respond to the needs of the market right now. And of course, conserve and protect those assets that you rely on.
Okay, Jeremy, is the crisis a hurdle in terms of what you're trying to achieve, or is it an opening?
It's both. I'll take the a bit of a cop out maybe, but listen, I think it's important first to recognize what the industry is going through. I mean, I don't need to say it, but of course, I mean, this is a really difficult moment. I mean, jobs have been lost, livelihoods have been lost. I mean, we work in countries that are extremely tourism dependent, and the economy is contracting in ways that are unimaginable, and we're not out of it yet. I mean, of course, this is a momentous problem, and understandably, there will be a desire to get things going again and to rev the economy back up. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. I'm a realist. I'm also an optimist in a sense, and I think that something that Paloma said is really important. I think the vulnerability of tourism has never been more clear, and this will not be the last crisis. I do think that the reason that this is also an opportunity, I mean, I don't know about you, Paloma, but I've never had sort of more interest in the work that we're doing and more opportunity to talk about the future of this industry in a meaningful way and to be a part of that conversation than ever before. Our philosophy and our solutions are sort of increasingly in demand through this, and I think that presents an opportunity. What I think is important to acknowledge is that nothing will change unless we actually take some action to do so, and this is both the challenge and the opportunity. because I think the problem, if you look at what the problem was before and what the problem will be again as growth starts anew, is that destinations especially do not have the capacity, the tools, or the mandate to understand the implications of growth and deal with it. So I wouldn't be surprised if, unfortunately, things, as growth starts again, that the same trajectory happens, unless there is a bit of intervention tackling the root issues, providing, providing destinations with a new mandate, and making sure that we understand much better the implications of growth, the impacts of tourism, and have the solutions in place to be able to do things differently. If that doesn't occur, then I'm quite afraid that things will just go back to the way that they were.
Sure. Well, you've said there's a need for a new kind of destination management. I know, but how do you see that coming about? Just by you persuading destination by destination that they need to think about things differently?
No, certainly not. I think, first of all, I think that this direction where destinations are differently about their role, so destination management organizations, this has already been a trend in the industry for a couple of years. We've been hearing a lot about destinations moving from marketing to management, or integrating management into their mandate. So I think that this has already been occurring. The problem is you can't wave a wand and suddenly become something different. I think this is going to be, in some ways, generational change. Why is it so difficult to change? Well, the strategies and budgets that have been allocated to these organizations have been particularly earmarked for marketing and promotion. The mandate has not been to manage impacts, to think about community as a group of stakeholders. It's been about growth, visitor numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So ultimately, what we need to start with is helping, working closely with destinations to change the way that success is defined, and to use different performance indicators to understand what sorts of decisions need to be made. Then ultimately, we need to create the mechanisms for different sorts of data to be collected. It's not going to be enough in the future to understand arrivals, visitor spend, and growth year on year and call it a day and call it success. We need to understand in a much more nuanced fashion, what are the impacts on biodiversity, for example? What is the cost of infrastructure maintenance in order to service seasonal demand? And we need to put this information in the hands of decision makers, so that they can look at much more holistically about whether or not tourism pays its way within a destination and ultimately meets the needs of communities. So without this mandate, without this data, and the last one I'll say is without the capacity to actually deal with. So we actually need new roles, new skills, and new types of people to actually come into these organizations and address the very real challenges that the destinations are facing. Without those things, I'm afraid nothing will change. So we can try to convince people around this mandate and this kind of need for a new model, but ultimately the way that it will occur is is to follow the money. Is if we can find ways ultimately for the destination management organizations to have the funding that they need to address these issues, and ultimately for private sector to come to the table, be transparent and understanding about the role that they play, both in terms of having a footprint and investing in local supply chains, and playing a role as a stakeholder in the future of these destinations, both from a sort of a resource perspective and as a partner.
Okay. I could be well out of date, but my understanding is that there have been limited studies thus far of the full cost of tourism, both the benefits and the societal community costs and all the rest of it. So, is there sufficient knowledge of the impacts of tourism at this stage to move on with this, or is what's needed first to be more studies of the impacts of tourism? Paloma.
Well, what he said, as far as you need to, different metrics to measure success, and that's by destination and by businesses as well. No, I mean, it can't just be volume and volume and volume and not really take stock as to what is, the actual cost of actually creating that volume and that value. No, and so I think it's up to every destination. There are already, mechanisms and metrics and things that need to be looked at, and they need to be looked at holistically, because tourism is not just one industry. It encompasses everything, from infrastructure impact, from community impact, from the nature and the environment and ecosystems. There's a lot of different impacts, and so you need to look at it holistically. So every destination needs to create that study for themselves and to be able to understand. But the solutions, it's not the solutions, but the mechanisms to be able to do that are there. However, I do believe that we need more solutions to be able to make this more let's just say homogeneous. How we actually collect the data in every destination, that is something that still needs to be worked on. But definitely every destination, and you see it more and more. I'm doing a carrying capacity analysis for the island of the Seychelles, and I've done this for the island of Aruba. So a lot of destinations, because the word over tourism, that was something that was definitely a very much a word that was becoming mainstream by the time COVID hit. And that has major implications. So there's definitely, that every destination needs to be looking at. We need to be able to also find ways to be able to do this, in a more homogeneous way, and then bring up that data so that we can, as an industry, be able to look at, that data, holistic data from all different kinds of destinations, and to be able to, report on it. So people need to know and understand what it all means. And another thing that I think is really important is to bring back, the communities. I think, communities have been, underserved, and they need to be back to the center stage, is their destinations. And you can see that also with, those places that have been, exploited too much, how communities react very negatively. And so communities need to be back. They need to be able to have that power and to be able to make decisions on what happens in their destinations. They need to come first. And that is something that, we also aim to, and there's been a lot of more and more, talk, like I said, when word over tourism happened and communities themselves were reacting. And we don't want to come back to that point. And that's why also right now, it's a good moment. Do we want to go back there? Do destinations want to go back there, to that position? Or now is the time to actually, put the mechanisms in place to be able to avoid going back to that over-tourism, position.
Okay. Well, look. There are 13 general principles. You and the first tier of supporters have agreed, and some of them are fairly standard in the sustainable travel space. Operate responsibly. Use sustainability standards and so on, but some of them are fairly demanding, I guess, within the context of the mainstream travel. Choose quality over quantity. Really, is that realistic when we hear all the time about tourism numbers, when there's people are tearing their hair out now because travel this year will be hugely down on the 1.4 billion travelers who traveled last year and so on? Are people really going to choose quality over quantity? in 2021, 2022?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's really interesting to think about, do we really want to go back to where we were? I mean, what does recovery, I think we need to redefine in a sense what recovery looks like. And I'm not an anti-growth person. I believe that growth is a part of sustainability. You need to have economic viability. But do we really want to go back to a tourism sector that was creating all kinds of problems, was sort of not a great experience in many places, was in the media all the time as becoming a sort of a sector that was not well looked upon, where people were protesting in the streets? I mean, what are we trying to go back to? So I think the quality over quantity piece needs a bit more nuance to really think about what that means. For me, it means not just that we only want a particular kind of traveler, but that it means that tourism itself should be a quality experience, and that what should be promoted within a destination community should be the idea that visitors have a good experience, and so do residents. Residents have a high quality sort of connection to tourism and to tourists. I think about this a lot because, for example, I think a lot about Amsterdam and the Netherlands, which has focused a lot in the past couple of years on understanding what quality tourism looks like. Amsterdam particularly is a community that has had some negative perception issues. It's a party town. People go there to, on their stag do's, and it's become quite crowded over the years. But by defining, I don't think quality in that sense is defined as let's suddenly have golf courses and elite travelers who go and spend money on high street. I think what it means is, can we create a better experience overall for the people that are visiting, and can we make it equitable? I don't think there's anything wrong with people having tourism businesses that service backpackers and partiers. In fact, we need to ensure that there is equitable opportunity for people in communities to benefit from the tourism sector. But are there things that can be done to ensure that there is, that there is crowd control, that visitors behave themselves, et cetera, et cetera? That's what I think quality means. And I think it also means that, that is the first place that we look when it comes to success. Maybe there's all kinds of growth that could happen in the Netherlands or anywhere else, but can we ensure that growth is handled well, dispersed well, and avoids creating conflict and vulnerability on places? That's what it means to me.
Okay. Paloma, another one of the principles is to demand fair income distribution, to set policies that counter unequal tourism benefits. Is that a demand you'll be putting to governments, to destinations? Who will you be asking to set these policies?
Well, these are businesses and destinations. They should all, strive to create a fair, not only, fair incomes, but livelihood opportunities that bring up the quality of life of those that are involved. A lot of times, the tourism industry can be, unfair, or let's just say the quality of the jobs, given the times that they need to work, and can be very demanding. And sometimes, yes, they are not very fair. So for sure, we need to be able to influence that both businesses in the local, in the destinations, have inclusive opportunities for the communities, that there are, of course, training opportunities, capacity building opportunities, so that we can bring up the quality of those kind of jobs, and therefore, have more fair distribution. I mean, it's in a lot of these, destinations that are up and coming developing nations, their industry has grown way beyond the limits that they can actually serve them. So a lot of them have to rely on, for example, importing importing talent, and it's about time to be able to let these destinations grow to be able to service that industry. So it's a lot of focus needs to be given to support these destinations to be able to create those quality jobs that are fair for those communities.
Okay, we're running out of time, so just two or three more quick questions, if I may. You have 20 odd initial sponsors, which is an interesting list of organisations, businesses, and so on, but few mainstream travel businesses, organisations. Do you see this widening out to embrace more of the mainstream travel sector? Is that the aim?
Yeah. I mean, that's the idea. Just to say that the signatory process is open to anyone. And in fact, since we launched, I'll give you the updated number. We have 116 new signatories. So it's already taking off, which is great. What we did with the group of founding signatories was simply attempt to have a bit of representation from companies, destinations, and other tourism stakeholders, just so that we could have a representative group and create a little bit more impact for the announcement. The idea was never to be exclusive or to create some kind of group among the initial signatories. And in fact, the goal is absolutely to reach everyone. We want this to be a movement, and we want companies, mainstream companies, to adhere to these principles and to really engage in discussion about, as we said at the beginning, what are the barriers to achieving them, and how can we sort of work together? Because it's hard to argue with them, as being a positive way forward. It's just that there are constraints that really need to be considered. There are a few. I mean, I'd point out Hilton, for example, as a mainstream company that has reviewed very carefully. I will give them credit. There were about 5 conversations that we had to get them to get to yes on the signatory process. But the idea is to be inclusive. This isn't going to be a standard where we will monitor the adherence, but really to create awareness around around what we think are these key messages, and again work on the solutions to getting there. So yeah, we invite everyone, and if there's discomfort with becoming signatories, then even further, let's have the conversation and figure out how to make it happen.
Okay, and when I saw the release on Tuesday, there were 22 signatories, I think. So have you gone up to 116 since Tuesday? Is that
116 more on top?
Yeah.
Of the 22.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's impressive. And Paloma, is the idea that you would widen the coalition with new coalition partners? There are other organisations out there who work in the same area.
Well, we have a core group, and we work very well together. Like we said, the criteria is that we're able to mobilize very quickly. We have very similar structures and mandates. So our core group will most likely remain our core group. This does not mean that we're not going to work with other organizations, potentially with specific committees or specific strategies that we want to accomplish. But right now, there's a lot to work on this team, because we already have an objective, and again, keeping it lean, keeping it as we are right now. Then it makes sense for us. Then that doesn't mean that things could not change in the future. Jeremy and I, like we said, we're very open to evolving, and this could take on any shape. But right now, the core team is really committed, and we're going to move this forward, as we are.
Okay, and now 30-second answer to this final question from both of you then. Where would you hope the coalition will be in a year or 2 years or 5 years time? Jeremy.
All of those things?
Yeah, well,
2 years or 5 years?
All right, well, one of them.
I would say my hope is that number one, that we have a big voice. I said from the beginning that the goal was to amplify some really important messages, and to do that collectively. And then secondly is that I hope we are identifying really concrete ways. We're all in this because we want to support the industry that we love to do, to achieve these things. And frankly, we need support to do that. We need concrete, we want to produce concrete things, and we will need funds and support and otherwise in order to do that. So that is one of the objectives, absolutely. And I hope that we've, scaled up our ability to have impact.
Paloma?
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to see is that we become that go-to organization or that go-to group for any resources, for any guidance when it comes to sustainable tourism. Sustainable tourism has, been, mainstream for a while now, but there hasn't been, a one place to look for the definition, to look for the resources, to look for guidance. And so we really want to be that group. We want to be that go-to coalition or group or resource for everyone once they're looking for that path. And so we want everybody to align. We want everybody to work for sustainable tourism to just become tourism. This is the way we do things.
That's a perfect point to end on. It's a marvelous initiative. Well done. Thank you for joining me today, Paloma Zapata and Jeremy Sampson, and good luck. Best wishes with the coalition.
Yeah, I look forward to updating you on it as we go along.
Thank you for the invitation. Lovely to meet you.
Travel Weekly webcasts in partnership with the PC agency, the travel consultancy amplifying luxury brands and boosting sales through expert PR, trade representation and dynamic marketing.